Well, I've got to get to the studio. You know, our religion, our faith, has to address the environment, has to address the community, has to address issues of poverty. What are some of the things you liked about Chicago?
Oh, the Art Institute.
And one of the things I know that you and I share is Chicago.
This is true.
Really distinct goals. Our primary interest was in campaign finance reform, but we were also interested in election law and in civil union.
And better and cleaner politics in Oregon. Dan, good to have you on Speaking Frankly. You know, that's the thing is, we as human beings live together on this planet Earth.
Right.
We also live together in our societies, in our nations, in our communities. Welcome to Speaking Frankly. Well, here we are. Fall is really upon us now. But there's a beauty in this fall, and I found today a beauty even in those trees that lost part of their leaves. There's another kind of beauty. But one of the things that is beautiful to me today is to be with my good friend Rob Schulman, who is a retired business executive, consultant, and who also has a mind for really philosophical and religious and theological ideas, as well as with business ideas. So, Rob, welcome to Speaking Frankly.
Thank you very much, Frank.
You know, we really do need to take time to explore how we got to be where we are.
I think so.
And that's in terms of ideas as well as many other things.
Right.
And so I'm just delighted that we can have this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure to be a guest on your show.
Well, now tell me, what is it that has been striking you in terms of this reflection on culture and ideas?
Well, I think the teeny tiny topic that I wanted to talk about today was the transition from a modern worldview, the modern world of technology and science and commercial technologies, to creating an entirely new worldview. So that's just a very small topic. And the pivot point of my topic is my fascination for what occurred in what is commonly called the First Enlightenment, the time where we had tremendous breakthroughs in science and tremendous breakthroughs also in how to govern people and how to give people individual rights. You know, the First Enlightenment, the time of the 1600s and 1700s, the time of Voltaire, the time of Isaac Newton, and all these things. And I'm hopeful, I really am, from the studying that I've been doing, from talking to various people, I'm hopeful that we might be at the threshold of what some authors are calling a Second Enlightenment.
A Second Enlightenment?
Yes.
Well, we certainly didn't quite get it all accomplished in the First Enlightenment, did we?
No, we didn't.
Now,
we made great strides.
You might mention, too, that here, of course, along with the philosophers, another very important, and other thinkers, another very important thing was the development of the printing press and the printed word. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Well, the printed word was a way to communicate to a mass audience ideas that people were having and to disseminate some very important ways of understanding the world, both in the world of science and in the world of the man-made world as well. And what's really fascinating to me is the products, what I call the products of the Enlightenment. You know, you think back, and at that time, for instance, there was no such thing as representative democracy. We sometimes forget that. There were no democracies that existed in the Western world at that time, or actually anywhere. The basic rights of man and the rule of law. The king could do whatever he bloody well pleased in most places in Western culture. The law was the law of an individual, not the law of the land. And again, we kind of take that for granted. Some of the other things were an unbelievable growth in prosperity and wealth and distribution of wealth. It wasn't so much anymore after you had the Industrial Revolution and more people were involved in a free market. What you had was a collective accumulation of tremendous wealth in a lot more hands than just the upper crust. And the technological advances, of course, were just monumental in areas of manufacturing, transportation, communication, all those things we associate with the modern world.
Yes.
So I'm saying to myself, okay, we still live in a modern world, fueled by the engine of the free market system and of capitalism, so what's wrong with that? And it's a very legitimate question.
Well, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about too along this line is that, yes, here we have a time where we can produce a great deal.
Yes.
And yet there are a lot of people without much of what we produce.
That's right. We have created an underclass, and then some people would believe it's a permanent underclass. But what I've done here, Frank, and I told you earlier, I took about 80 to 90 pages of notes and I reduced it down to one sheet of paper to kind of help guide me. And it's a way to help me look at this in a holistic way and in a more simplified way. Every time there are advances in the world, I think historically we can say quite definitively, every time there's advances, there's also the dark side, the shadow side. So we had great industry. We had mass employment for people that didn't have employment before. But were there downsides to those things? I think we can say very definitively there were downsides. So for instance, one of the things that was a natural but unintended consequence perhaps of industry was tremendous pollution. Pollution of the water, pollution of the air, pollution of the land itself, strip mining, because the view of the world was, it's out there, let's grab it, we can make some money, and there are dark sides to that. There are inconvenient truths, as some people call them, with that.
Now that's really what's happened to us in the 19th century going into the 20th century, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, particularly after 1850. But in the 20th century, we saw wholesale destruction of entire environments. We were killing rivers, killing lakes, and you know, we said to ourselves, maybe that's not just a good idea, but how can we get beyond that? And here's the premise of a new way to look at the world, a new way to understand the world, and a new way to act and interact in the world. Exactly what happened after the First Enlightenment.
Now, tell me this.
Yes.
I mean, this world that we found ourselves in at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century,
right,
we sometimes refer to that as the industrial age.
The industrial age.
Yes. But now, it had its problems.
That's right. We have illuminated some of the problems. And, you know, to be fair, every era in history has its problems. Whenever we make advances, for instance, the internet is a good example. Very powerful communication tool. And yet you have terrible things happen on the internet, things that we can't control. So there's always the unintended consequences, or again, what some people call the shadow side. So let's look also at, from the time of the First Enlightenment, we had one thing that probably helps too is, how did they get to the conclusion that things needed changing? Well, you know, at that time, people didn't have legal rights. There were no such things as courts of law where people could bring their grievances, or where somebody had what's called the writ of habeas corpus. I can come in and arrest you and put you in jail without formally charging you. And in today's world, we say that's not right. A person should not go to jail without some kind of authority and a rule of law. And it's those kinds of really global understandings that we have come to embrace and understand, and that we must keep. These are very valuable, to have a court system, to have a system of justice, to have a system of government which is fair, and a system of government which is representative. These are things that are vitally important.
You just said a government that's representative.
That's right.
You're talking about a representative democracy, aren't you?
The birth of representative democracy.
Yes, which is what we have here in the United States.